Philip Waldorf didn't just tip poorly, he tipped with insults. He looked at the waitress, laughed at her pronunciation of Pinot Noir, and told his business partners that hiring immigrants was charity work for the heirs. He felt powerful. He felt untouchable. But Philip made a fatal calculation that night. He assumed that because she wore an apron, she was uneducated. He didn't know that the woman pouring his water spoke 5 languages fluently, and she had just understood the illegal details of the merger he was whispering in Swiss German. And she was about to ruin him. The Onyx Room didn't sell food, it sold exclusion. Located on the 45th floor of a glass needle piercing the Manhattan skyline, it was the kind of place where the water menu had more pages than a tabloid magazine, and the silence was heavy with the scent of old money. Madeline adjusted the collar of her stiff black uniform. The fabric was cheap polyester, a stark contrast to the Egyptian cotton tablecloths she smoothed down with trembling hands. Her feet throbbed. A double shift on a Friday night was a grueling test of endurance, but the rent for her studio apartment in Queens wasn't going to pay itself. Table 4 needs water, sparkling, and don't look them in the eye unless they ask you a question, the floor manager, Giles, hissed as he breezed past her. Giles was a man who treated his blood pressure medication like candy and his staff like disposable napkins. Madeline nodded, keeping her head down. She grabbed the crystal pitcher, the condensation cold against her palm. Table 4 was the prime spot, the corner window view overlooking Central Park. Tonight it was occupied by 3 men who looked like they owned the skyline they were staring at. In the center sat Philip Waldorf. Everyone knew Philip. He was the CEO of Waldorf Dynamics, a man whose face was plastered on the cover of Forbes and Fortune seemingly every other month. He was 35, handsome in a predatory way, with slicked-back blonde hair and a suit that cost more than Madeline's entire education. He was currently laughing, a loud, barking sound that made the other diners flinch. "So I told the board, if you want ethics, go to a church. If you want profit, you shut up and sign the line," Philip boasted, leaning back in his leather chair. The 2 men with him chuckled nervously. One was a heavy-set man named Arthur, and the other was a younger, sharper-looking associate named Brent. Madeline approached the table, moving with the practiced invisibility of a seasoned server. She reached over to refill Philip's glass. "Water, sir?" she asked softly. Philip stopped talking. He held up a hand, not looking at her, but silencing her. He turned his head slowly, his blue eyes locking onto her name tag, then her face. "Excuse me?" Philip said. "Would you like sparkling or still water, sir?" Madeline repeated. Her voice carried the faint, rhythmic lilt of her grandmother's native tongue, a soft rolling of the R's and a distinct clipping of the vowels. It was subtle, a ghost of a heritage she usually tried to suppress, but exhaustion had made her slip. Philip smirked. He looked at Arthur. "Did you hear that?" Arthur blinked. "Hear what, Philip?" "The accent," Philip said, loud enough for the neighboring table to hear. He turned back to Madeline, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Say that again." "Sparkling." Madeline felt the heat rise up her neck. She gripped the pitcher tighter. "Sparkling, sir." "Sparkling," Philip mimicked, exaggerating the sound into a cartoonish distortion. "Where are you from, sweetheart? Lower East Side via a shipping container?" The table went quiet. Brent looked down at his napkin. "I am from here, sir," Madeline said, her voice steady despite the humiliation burning in her chest. "Born in Brooklyn." "Brooklyn via where? That tongue doesn't sound local," Philip chuckled, picking up his wine glass. "It's charming, really. Rustic, like a peasant trying to order at a palace. Brings a certain authentic grit to the establishment." Madeline froze. She had 2 master's degrees. one in comparative linguistics from the Sorbonne in Paris, and another in international relations. She had spoken at conferences in Geneva before her father's political exile, and subsequent health crisis had drained their family accounts, forcing her to work 3 jobs just to pay for his medical treatments. She wasn't uneducated. She was overqualified and unlucky. "I will bring the sparkling, sir," she said, turning to leave. "Wait," Philip snapped. "We aren't done. Bring us the wine list, and try to read the French labels without butchering them, all right? I'd hate for the vintage to turn sour just from hearing you pronounce it." He waved her away as if shooing a fly. As Madeleine walked toward the service station, her knuckles white, she heard Philip's voice carry clearly across the room. "It's amazing what they let in these days. You spend $500 on a steak, you expect the help to speak the king's English, not whatever gutter dialect that was." Giles was waiting for her at the station. "What did you do?" he whispered furiously. "Mr. Waldorf looks annoyed." "He didn't like my accent," Madeleine said, her jaw tight. "Then lose it," Giles snapped. "Tonight is big. He has foreign investors coming in later, German heavyweights. If you embarrass this restaurant, Madeleine, you're out. Do you understand? Back to the temp agency." Madeleine looked at Giles, then back at Philip, who was now checking his gold watch. "Understood," she said. She understood perfectly. Philip Waldorf thought she was simple. He thought she was background noise. He had no idea that the gutter dialect he mocked was just one of the 5 languages she spoke, and he certainly didn't know that the German heavyweights he was waiting for were from the Weber Group, a firm Madeleine had written a thesis on during her time in Europe. She took a deep breath, smoothed her apron, and grabbed the wine list. The game had changed. Philip wanted a show? She would give him one. But she would be listening. Closely. 30 minutes later, the atmosphere at table 4 shifted. The 2 sycophants, Arthur and Brent, had been dismissed, replaced by 2 stern-looking men in grey suits. They were older, with the distinct, severe posture of Swiss bankers. Madeleine hovered near the service station, polishing silverware that was already clean. She needed to be close enough to hear, but far enough not to be noticed. "Herr Waldorf," the older of the 2 guests said, extending a hand. "I am Lucas. This is my associate, Stefan." "Pleasure, Lucas. Please, sit," Philip said. His arrogance was still there, but it was masked now by a veneer of corporate charm. He signaled for Madeleine. She approached, keeping her eyes lowered. "A bottle of the Domaine de la Romane Conti," Philip ordered, glancing at her with a dare in his eyes. 99. Madeleine didn't flinch. "Excellent choice, sir." She pronounced it perfectly, her French accent flawless, refined, and distinctly Parisian. Philip blinked, surprised but quickly recovered. "Lucky guess," he muttered to Stefan. As she uncorked the bottle, the conversation at the table turned to business. Philip began speaking in English, confident and loud. "The acquisition of the lithium mines in Nevada is secure," Philip said. "Waldorf Dynamics has full environmental clearance. The EPA reports are spotless." Lucas nodded slowly, but then he turned to Stefan and switched to Swiss German, a dialect distinct from standard High German, faster and harder for the untrained ear to catch. "Der Amerikaner looked," Lucas said quietly. The American is lying. Madeleine's hand paused on the bottle for a fraction of a second. She continued pouring, her face a mask of indifference. Stefan replied in the same rapid dialect. "Are you sure? The reports look authentic." "They are falsified," Lucas said, taking a sip of the wine Madeleine had just poured. "My contact in the Nevada governor's office says the water table is contaminated. If we sign this merger, the Weber Group inherits the lawsuits. Waldorf is trying to offload a toxic asset before the scandal breaks." Madeline's heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't just a business deal. It was fraud on a massive scale. Philip was trying to trick these men into buying a company that was about to be hit with environmental lawsuits, essentially bankrupting them to save himself. Philip, oblivious to what had just been said, grinned. "I'm sorry, gentlemen. My German is a little rusty. High school was a long time ago. We are all good on the numbers?" Philip didn't speak German. He was flying blind, relying on the translated documents and his own bravado. Lucas smiled politely at Philip, switching back to English. "We are just discussing the efficiency of your operations, Mr. Waldorf. Stefan is very impressed with your speed." "Speed is the name of the game," Philip laughed, oblivious. "We move fast, we break things, we rebuild better." Madeline finished pouring the wine. She placed the bottle in the ice bucket. She had a choice. She could walk away, finish her shift, and go home to her unpaid bills. Philip Waldorf was a monster, but he was a powerful monster. Crossing him could mean blacklisting in every restaurant in the city. But then she remembered his laugh. Sparkling. The way he looked at her like she was dirt on his shoe. Stefan looked up at her. "Miss, could we have some bread, please?" "Of course," Madeline said. As she turned, Philip grabbed her wrist. It was a tight, aggressive grip. "And be quick about it," Philip hissed, his voice low so the Swiss men couldn't hear the malice. "Stop hovering. You're making the guests uncomfortable with your presence." He released her, wiping his hand on a napkin as if she were unclean. Madeline walked to the kitchen, her blood boiling. She wasn't just angry anymore. She was calculated. Philip was banking on the language barrier to hide his incompetence and his deceit. He assumed his guests were polite enough not to interrogate him in English, and he assumed the help was too stupid to understand the leverage hanging in the air. She grabbed the bread basket. She needed a plan. She couldn't just blurt out the truth. Giles would fire her on the spot, and Philip would deny it. She needed to expose him in a way that left him no room to maneuver. She returned to the table. The conversation had shifted. "If we sign tonight," Stefan said in Swiss German, "we transfer the funds by morning. But if the water contamination is real, we lose 40% of our valuation." "We need proof," Lucas replied. "Without proof, we cannot walk away. The contract has a penalty clause for backing out without cause." They were trapped. They suspected him, but didn't have the smoking gun to break the deal without losing millions in penalties. Philip was pushing a gold pen across the table. "Shall we make history, gentlemen?" Madeline placed the bread basket down. She looked at Lucas. She saw the hesitation in his eyes. "More water, sir?" she asked Philip. "No," Philip snapped. "Leave us." "Actually," Madeline said, her voice raising just an octave, clear and sharp. She looked directly at Philip, then turned her gaze to Lucas. She switched languages, not to English, not to French. "Entschuldigen Sie die Störung, meine Herren," she said in flawless, high society German. "Pardon the interruption, gentlemen." The silence at the table was instant and absolute. Philip dropped his fork. Lucas and Stefan stared at her, their mouths slightly open. "Aber ich glaube, Sie haben Ihr Tablet dort liegen lassen," she continued, pointing to a folder Stefan had placed on the floor. It was a lie, a pretext to speak. "What are you doing?" Philip demanded, his face turning red. "Speak English." Madeline ignored him. She looked Lucas dead in the eye and switched to the specific Swiss-German dialect they had been using, a dialect almost impossible for a foreigner to fake. The soil samples from the Nevada site were omitted from page 42 of the English contract, she said softly, rapidly. "Ask him about the Red Rock independent survey. If he denies it exists, you have your cause to break the penalty clause." Lucas went pale. He looked at Madeline, seeing not a waitress, but a savior. You understand us?" Lucas whispered in English. "I understand everything," Madeline said, her eyes flickering to Philip, "including the fact that this man thinks so little of his servers, he assumes we are deaf as well as mute." Philip stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. "You're fired! Get out! Giles, get this woman out of here!" Giles came running from the front desk, looking terrified. "Madeline, what is going on?" "She is harassing my guests," Philip roared. "She's speaking gibberish and interrupting a billion-dollar negotiation." Lucas stood up slowly. He was a tall man, and he didn't look terrified. He looked furious. He turned to Philip. "She is not speaking gibberish, Mr. Waldorf," Lucas said, his voice like ice. "She is speaking the truth." Lucas turned to Madeline. "The Red Rock survey?" "Yes," Madeline said, standing her ground even as Giles grabbed her arm. "It was suppressed 3 weeks ago. It's public record in the Swiss Environmental Archives if you know where to look. Waldorf Dynamics buried it in the US. Philip's face drained of color. He looked from Lucas to Madeline, realizing for the first time that the peasant he had mocked was holding a knife to the throat of his career. "That's confidential information," Philip stammered, accidentally admitting she was right. "It is fraud," Stefan corrected. Lucas picked up the contract and tore it in half. The sound ripped through the silent restaurant like a gunshot. "Get out!" Philip snarled at Madeline, his voice shaking with rage. "I will ensure you never work in this city again. I will bury you." "You can try," Madeline said, pulling her arm free from Giles. "But you seem to be having trouble burying your own toxic waste." She took off her apron, folded it neatly, and placed it on the table next to the torn contract. "I quit," she said. She turned and walked away, her head high. But she knew this wasn't over. Philip Waldorf was not a man who let people humiliate him. As she exited the revolving doors of the Onyx room and stepped out into the cold Manhattan night, she checked her phone. She had 0 missed calls, $0 in her savings, and one very powerful, very dangerous enemy. But as she reached the subway station, a black sedan pulled up to the curb. The window rolled down. It wasn't Philip, it was Lucas. "Get in," the Swiss banker said. "We have much to discuss, and I think you are overqualified for pouring water." The interior of the black Mercedes Maybach smelled of cedarwood and expensive leather, a stark difference from the stale beer and grease scent that usually clung to Madeline's uniform after a shift. She sat stiffly on the edge of the seat, her hands folded in her lap. Lucas Weber pressed a button, and the privacy partition slid up, sealing them off from the driver. "You saved us approximately $400 million tonight," Lucas said, opening a mini fridge and offering her a bottle of water. "And you did it while risking your employment." "Why?" Madeline took the water but didn't drink. "I didn't do it for you, Mr. Weber. I did it because men like Philip Waldorf think the world is a playground where they can break toys without consequences. I'm tired of being a toy." Lucas studied her. "You said the Red Rock survey was in the archives. How did a waitress in Manhattan know about an obscure geological report in Geneva?" "I wasn't always a waitress," Madeline said, staring out the tinted window as the city lights blurred by. 2 years ago, I was a junior analyst for an NGO monitoring corporate ethics in the mining sector. I speak French, German, Italian, Spanish, and Mandarin. I read the Weber Group's expansion prospectus when it was leaked on a German forum. I recognized the geological coordinates. When Waldorf mentioned Nevada, I connected the dots. I knew the water table data he was presenting had to be falsified. Lucas leaned back, a look of genuine respect crossing his stoic face. "And yet, you are pouring water at the Onyx room," My father has early onset Parkinson's, Madeleine said quietly. The treatments are experimental and not covered by insurance. The NGO didn't pay enough. Tips at a high-end steakhouse do. Or they did. Lucas nodded slowly. He pulled a heavy cream-colored business card from his jacket pocket. I don't need a waitress, Madeleine, but I do need a forensic linguist, someone who can read between the lines of international contracts and catch the lies before we sign them. The Weber Group is staying in New York for 3 weeks to restructure our US portfolio. I want to hire you as a consultant. Madeleine looked at him. A consultant? Starting immediately. Your salary will be triple what you made at the restaurant, plus a retainer. And, Lucas paused, we will cover your father's medical expenses through our corporate insurance plan. Tears pricked Madeleine's eyes, but she blinked them away. This was the lifeline she had been praying for. I accept. Good, Lucas said, because war has just been declared. Philip Waldorf is not going to let tonight go. He is a petty, vindictive man. You need to be ready. Lucas was right. Across town, in the penthouse office of the Waldorf Tower, Philip was not sleeping. He was pacing, a crystal tumbler of scotch shattered against the wall, leaving a wet, amber stain on the silk wallpaper. She humiliated me, Philip screamed at the man standing by the door. A nobody! A servant! The man by the door was named Gower. He was short, balding, and wore a suit that was ill-fitting on purpose to make him look harmless. Gower was not harmless. He was a reputation manager, a polite term for a man who destroyed lives professionally. We can sue her for breaking the NDA in her employment contract, Gower said calmly, tapping on his tablet. That takes too long, Philip spat. She cost me the Weber deal. I want her to hurt. I want her homeless. I want her unhireable. I want her to wish she had never opened her mouth. Gower nodded. She rents a studio in Queens. The building is owned by a shell corporation, under the shell of a shell that, well, eventually, it links back to one of your real estate holdings. Philip smiled, a cruel, razor-thin expression. Evict her. Tonight. On what grounds? Make something up. Noise complaints, illegal subletting, drug use, I don't care. Just get her on the street. 2 hours later, the Mercedes dropped Madeleine off in front of her building in Queens. It was a run-down brick structure, but it was home. She felt a surge of hope for the first time in years. She had a new job. She could pay for her dad's meds. She climbed the 4 flights of stairs, exhaustion finally hitting her. She reached for her keys. They didn't fit. She frowned, jiggling the lock. What the? Suddenly, the door opened from the inside. A large man in a security uniform stood there. Behind him, Madeleine could see her belongings, her books, her clothes, her father's framed photos, shoved haphazardly into black garbage bags. Who are you? Madeleine demanded. What are you doing in my apartment? You've been evicted, the man grunted, kicking a bag toward her. Management orders. Lease terminated effective immediately due to violation of Clause 4B. Hazardous materials. Hazardous materials, Madeleine cried. I don't have hazardous materials. I have books. Not my problem. You have 10 minutes to clear the hallway before I call the cops for trespassing. Madeleine stood there, stunned. She looked at the padlock that had been installed on her door. It was brand new. Her phone buzzed. It was a text message from an unknown number. Sparkling water comes at a price. Enjoy the streets. P. Rage, hot and blinding, flooded her veins. Philip. He had moved this fast. He owned the building. He owned everything. She grabbed the bag with her clothes and the box with her father's medication. It was snowing lightly now, wet flakes sticking to her eyelashes. She dragged her life down the stairs, out onto the cold pavement. She sat on her suitcase, shivering. She had nowhere to go. Her father was in a care facility upstate, but she couldn't go there. She couldn't let him see her like this. Her phone buzzed again. She expected another taunt from Philip. It was Lucas. "My security team tells me there has been an incident at your address. Do not panic. A car is coming back for you. We have a suite reserved at the Pierre. Bring your documents. We work at dawn." Madeline stared at the screen. Philip thought he had crushed her. He thought putting her on the street would break her spirit. But as she looked at the text, she didn't feel broken. She felt dangerous. She had nothing left to lose, and she knew exactly where Philip hid his skeletons. The suite at the Pierre Hotel was larger than Madeline's entire apartment building. It had been converted into a command center. Monitors lined the antique oak desks, displaying stock tickers, legal briefs, and satellite maps. It had been 3 days since the eviction. Madeline hadn't slept much. She was fueled by espresso and vengeance. "Focus on the shell companies," Madeline said, pointing to a complex diagram on the whiteboard. She was dressed in a sharp charcoal suit provided by the Weber Group, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. She looked every inch the corporate strategist. Lucas stood beside her, arms crossed. "We found the Nevada fraud. We saved our capital. Isn't that enough?" "No," Madeline said. Philip didn't just lie about the water table. Look at the financing structure for the Nevada project. The initial investment didn't come from Waldorf Dynamics accounts. It came from a holding company in Cyprus called Blue Horizon. Cyprus is a common tax haven, Stefan noted from his laptop. "Yes," Madeline said, switching to the screen displaying Blue Horizon's public filing. "But look at the board of directors. It lists a Dmitry Volkov as the primary beneficiary." "I don't know the name," Lucas said. "I do," Madeline said grimly. "When I was at the Sorbonne, I translated legal transcripts for a case involving the Russian energy sector. Volkov isn't a businessman. He's a frontman for the Bratva, the Russian mafia. He launders money through legitimate American infrastructure projects." The room went silent. The hum of the computer servers seemed to grow louder. "If Waldorf is taking money from the Bratva," Lucas whispered, "he is not just a fraudster. He is compromised." "He's laundering their money," Madeline explained. "He takes the dirty cash from Volkov, invests it in these green energy mines, inflates the value with fake environmental reports, sells the company to clean investors like you, and then pays Volkov back with clean American dollars. It's a perfect cycle." "And if we prove this?" Stefan asked. "Then he goes to federal prison for 20 years, Madeline said. "But we need the link. We need a communication between Waldorf and Volkov." "We can't get that," Lucas said. "Waldorf uses encrypted servers. His cybersecurity is military grade." Madeline smiled slightly. "He is arrogant, Lucas. Arrogant men make mistakes. Remember the restaurant? He spoke Swiss German because he thought I was stupid. He probably speaks to Volkov in broken Russian or uses a translator he thinks is loyal. So what do? We trigger him," Madeline said. "We release a press statement saying the Weber Group pulled out because of irregularities in international financing. We don't mention Russia. We just hint that we know about the money source. He will panic. He will call Volkov to reassure him." "And then?" "And then," Madeline said, "I listen." Lucas authorized the press release at 2 p.m. By 2:15 p.m., Waldorf Dynamics stock dipped by 4%. By 2:30 p.m., Madeline's phone rang. It wasn't Philip. It was the front desk of the hotel. "Ms. Madeline, there are 2 gentlemen here to see you. They say they are from the NYPD." Madeline's stomach dropped. She looked at Lucas. "Police." "Let them up," Lucas said calmly. "We have nothing to hide." Minutes later, a heavy knock rattled the suite door. Stefan opened it. 2 detectives walked in, followed by a man in a sharp suit. Gower. "Madeline," the lead detective said, flashing a badge. "I'm Detective Miller. We have a warrant for your arrest." "Arrest?" Madeline stood up. "For what?" "Grand larceny and corporate espionage," Miller said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "Mr. Waldorf claims you stole a proprietary hard drive containing sensitive trade secrets from the Onyx room on the night you were fired. He has a witness who saw you take it from his briefcase." "That is a lie," Madeline shouted. "I took nothing but my apron." Gower stepped forward, a smug smile on his face. "Mr. Waldorf's associate, Mr. Arthur Penhaligon, has signed a sworn affidavit. He saw you reach into the bag while pouring water. We also have footage of you leaving with a bulky bag." "My uniform!" Madeline cried. "That was my uniform in the bag." "Save it for the judge," Miller said, grabbing her wrist. He spun her around and clicked the cold metal cuffs onto her wrists. Lucas stepped forward, his voice booming. "This is harassment. She's under my protection. I will have my legal team here in 10 minutes. "You can send them to the precinct," Miller said dismissively. "This is a serious charge. Theft of intellectual property valued over $5 million. Madeline looked at Gower. He winked at her. This was Philip's play. He knew he couldn't silence her with eviction, so he was removing her from the board entirely. If she was in jail, she couldn't analyze documents. She couldn't talk to the press. And with a felony charge, her credibility would be destroyed. Who would believe a thief over a billionaire? "Lucas," Madeline said, her voice shaking as they marched her toward the door. "The Blue Horizon accounts. Don't stop looking. He's going to make the call to Volkov today. You have to intercept it." "Quiet!" Detective Miller shoved her forward. As they dragged her through the lobby of the Pierre, guests stared. Madeline kept her head high, but inside she was terrified. Philip Waldorf had weaponized the justice system against her. She was shoved into the back of a squad car. The door slammed shut, separating her from the world. Gower leaned into the open window. "Mr. Waldorf sends his regards," Gower whispered. "He said to tell you that in prison, the accents are much worse. You'll hate it." The car pulled away. Madeline leaned her head against the plexiglass divider. She was trapped. But Gower had just made a mistake. He had confirmed Philip was scared. She closed her eyes and began to recite verb conjugations in her head to keep from crying. "Io sono. Tu sei. Lui è." She wasn't done. She was just changing battlefields. And she knew something Philip didn't. The NYPD holding cells were full of people who had been screwed over by the system. And people talk, especially when they think no one is listening who speaks their language. Philip thought he had buried her, but he had just planted a seed. Central booking in Lower Manhattan was a place where time didn't exist. There were no windows, only the hum of fluorescent lights that buzzed like trapped insects. The air tasted of metallic despair and industrial disinfectant. Madeline sat on a cold steel bench, her knees pulled to her chest. Her charcoal suit, once crisp and authoritative, was now wrinkled and out of place among the orange jumpsuits and stained streetwear of the other women in the holding cell. She had been processed like a criminal, fingerprinted, mug shot taken, her jewelry and phone confiscated. The humiliation was a physical weight pressing down on her chest. Philip Waldorf had won. He hadn't just fired her. He had dismantled her identity. To the world, she was no longer a polyglot analyst. She was a thief. "Hey, fancy suit," a woman with a bruised eye sneered from across the cell. "You lose your way to Wall Street?" Madeline didn't answer. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the noise. The weeping, the shouting, the clanging of bars. She focused on the languages swirling around her. It was a defense mechanism she had developed as a child. If she could understand the words, she could understand the threat. To her left, two women argued in rapid-fire Dominican Spanish about a boyfriend named Hector. To her right, a woman sobbed quietly, muttering prayers in what sounded like Tagalog. But it was the voice in the corner that made Madeline's eyes snap open. It was a low, rhythmic rocking sound. A woman was sitting on the floor, her head covered by a thin grey hoodie, rocking back and forth. She was speaking to the concrete floor. Oni ubijut меня. Oni znают, что я видела. Oni ubijut меня. Madeline froze. It was Russian. They will kill me. They know what I saw. They will kill me. The accent wasn't Muscovite. It was rougher, rural, perhaps from the southern regions near the Georgian border. It was the dialect of the working class, the invisible people. Madeline slid slowly along the bench, moving closer to the corner. She kept her gaze low, non-threatening. Kto тебя убьет? Madeline whispered in the same dialect. Who will kill you? The woman in the hoodie stopped rocking. She went rigid. Slowly she lifted her head. She was older, perhaps 50, with hands that were red and calloused from years of scrubbing floors. Her eyes were wide with terror. You speak? The woman whispered in Russian. I speak, Madeline replied softly. My name is Madeline. Why are you afraid? The woman looked around the cell, ensuring the guards weren't listening. I am Katya. I cleaned. At the tower. The big glass one. Madeline's heart skipped a beat. Waldorf Tower? Katya flinched at the name. Yes, the penthouse, the golden floor. Why are you here, Katya? Stealing. Katya spat the word out, bitter tears welling in her eyes. They said I stole a watch, a Rolex. I didn't steal. I have worked for 30 years. I never took a penny. I believe you, Madeline said, and she meant it. Who accused you? Was it a man named Gower? Short? Bald? Katya's face went pale. She grabbed Madeline's wrist, her grip like iron. The fixer, yes. He came. He found me in the office. I was emptying the shredder. What was in the shredder, Katya? Not paper, Katya whispered. Plastic. Red plastic cards. Mr. Waldorf, he was yelling at the fat man, Mr. Arthur. He threw the cards in the shredder, but the shredder was full. It jammed. Madeline's mind raced. Red plastic cards. Key cards. Or secure data drives. I tried to fix it, Katya continued rapidly. I pulled the bin out. The cards were bent, but not destroyed. I saw the names on them. Not English names. Cyrillic. Russian names, Madeline breathed. I saw Volkov, Katya said, trembling. My cousin. He was killed by Volkov men in Moscow 10 years ago. I know that name. It is death. I got scared. I put the pieces in my pocket. I wanted to show my priest, ask him what to do. But Gower, he walked in. He saw me at the machine. He didn't check my pockets. He just called the police and said I took a watch. Katya, Madeline said intensely, squeezing the woman's hand. Where are the pieces now? Did the police take them? No, Katya shook her head. When the police came, I was in the locker room changing. I was scared. I hid them, inside the lining of my winter boots. They are in the property locker here. They took my boots, gave me these. She pointed to the cheap canvas slip-ons issued by the jail. The evidence is here, Madeline realized, in this building. They will deport me, Katya sobbed, and then Volkov will find me. No, Madeline said firmly, they won't. Suddenly, the heavy steel door buzzed loudly. A guard stepped in. Madeline Evans, bail posted. Madeline stood up. She looked at Katya. I am going to get you out. Do not say a word to anyone. Not a word. Who are you? Katya asked, hope warring with fear in her eyes. "I'm the woman who is going to burn the tower down," Madeline said. Lucas was waiting in the lobby of the precinct. Beside him stood a man who looked like he was carved out of granite. Donovan Stark, the most expensive criminal defense attorney in New York. "You look terrible," Lucas said, handing her a coffee. "I need $5,000 cash," Madeline said immediately, ignoring the coffee. "And I need Mr. Stark to take on a pro bono case right now." Donovan Stark raised an eyebrow. "I don't do pro bono, Miss Evans. And I certainly don't take orders from clients who are currently facing 20 years for corporate espionage. You do if you want the smoking gun that links Philip Waldorf to the Russian mafia," Madeline said. "It's sitting in the property locker of this precinct, inside a pair of cheap knockoff Ugg boots belonging to inmate 8940, Katya Ivanova." Lucas looked at her, his blue eyes sharpening. "Explain." "Waldorf tried to destroy encrypted keycards linked to the Volkov accounts. He failed. The cleaner saved them. He framed her to silence her, just like he framed me. If we bail her out, we get the boots. If we get the boots, we get the keys." Lucas turned to Donovan. "Get the woman out. Whatever the bail is, double it for speed." Donovan sighed, adjusting his silk tie. "It's going to be a long night." 48 hours. That was all the time Donovan Stark had needed to turn the chaos of the precinct into a calculated strike. The conference room at the district attorney's office was designed to intimidate. It was a windowless box of polished mahogany and grey carpet, air-conditioned to a temperature that felt less like an office and more like a meat locker. The air smelled of lemon furniture polish and the stale, metallic scent of nervous sweat. Madeline sat on the left side of the long table, her hands resting on a notepad. She wore a simple white blouse and black trousers, a deliberate choice by Donovan. She needed to look like the underdog. She needed to look like the victim of a corporate giant. But beneath the table, her legs were shaking, not from fear, but from a terrifying mixture of adrenaline and rage. Across from her, Philip Waldorf looked like he was attending a boring board meeting. He was flanked by Gower, who was busy scrolling through messages on his phone, and a phalanx of 3 expensive lawyers who were currently whispering amongst themselves. Philip looked rested, his skin glowing with a fresh tan, his navy bespoke suit devoid of a single wrinkle. He exuded the relaxed, heavy confidence of a man who knew the game was rigged in his favor because he had bought the referees. Lucas Weber sat behind Madeline, a silent sentinel. He hadn't spoken since they entered the room, but his presence was a warm weight at her back. "Shall we begin?" The assistant district attorney, a harried-looking man named Mr. Henderson, tapped a stack of files on the table. He looked tired, the kind of tired that came from dealing with high-priced defense attorneys who clogged the system with paperwork. "Ms. Evans," Henderson began, his voice dry. "This is a preliminary evidentiary hearing to determine the viability of the charges pressed by Mr. Waldorf. We have sworn affidavits from staff at the Onyx Room stating you were seen accessing Mr. Waldorf's private briefcase during service. We also have the chain of custody for a hard drive found in your apartment containing proprietary data." He paused, looking over his glasses at her. "The evidence is substantial. Fabricated," Donovan Stark said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a razor. He didn't even look up from his notes. "The evidence is fabricated, and the chain of custody is corrupted by the complainant's own employees." "Objection!" one of Philip's lawyers barked. "Bored. Conjecture." Philip sighed, a loud theatrical sound that drew everyone's eyes. He held up a hand, silencing his own legal team. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, and locked eyes with Madeline. "Can we stop the theater?" Philip asked. His voice was smooth, dripping with a toxic blend of pity and condescension. "Look, Madeline, I get it. You were struggling. You saw an opportunity. You got greedy. It happens." Madeline met his gaze. His eyes were blue and cold, like the bottom of a pool. "I don't want to ruin your life," Philip continued, his tone softening to a conspiratorial whisper. "You're what? 26? You have a whole life of serving ahead of you. If you admit to the theft right now, I'll drop the civil suit. You take the plea deal. 2 years probation, no jail time, and we all go home. You're out of your depth, sweetheart. You're drowning, and I'm offering you a raft." He smiled. It was the same smile he had given her when he mocked her pronunciation of Pinot Noir. It was a smile that said she was nothing more than an insect he could crush or spare at his whim. Madeline felt the heat rise in her chest, but she forced her breathing to remain steady. She remembered the look on Katya's face in the cell. She remembered the eviction notice. She remembered her father's medical bills. "I am not out of my depth, Philip," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it didn't tremble. It carried the steel of someone who had nothing left to lose. Philip raised an eyebrow, amused. "Is that so?" "I am just waiting for the translation," she finished. Philip frowned, a flicker of genuine confusion crossing his face. "Translation? What are you talking about? You're speaking nonsense again." Donovan Stark stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single, clear plastic evidence bag. Inside sat 3 jagged fragments of red plastic, taped together with forensic precision. He slid the bag across the polished wood. It stopped directly in front of Philip. "Your Honor," Donovan addressed the judge presiding over the hearing, though his eyes were fixed on Gower. "The defense moves to dismiss all charges on the grounds that the accuser, Mr. Waldorf, is currently under active investigation by the Federal Bureau of Investigation for money laundering, racketeering, and treason." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a room where all the oxygen had suddenly been sucked out. The ADA, Mr. Henderson, blinked rapidly. "Mr. Stark, those are serious accusations. If this is a delay tactic, is it?" Donovan turned toward the heavy double doors at the back of the room. "Detective Miller, if you please." The doors swung open. Detective Miller, the same man who had handcuffed Madeline in the hotel lobby, walked in. But the arrogance was gone from his stride. He looked pale, sweating. Behind him walked 2 men in blue windbreakers. The yellow letters on their backs were unmistakable. FBI. Philip's tan seemed to evaporate instantly. He went ashen. He whipped his head toward Gower, but the fixer was staring intently at his shoes, refusing to make eye contact. "What is this?" Philip stammered, his voice rising an octave. "Who are these men?" "These men are here for the owner of that key card," Madeline said. She stood up, her legs no longer shaking. She walked to the edge of the table, looking down at the Billionaire. "The key card you tried to destroy in your office, Shredder. The one you framed a cleaning lady named Katya to hide." Philip let out a breathless, incredulous laugh. That's garbage. It's broken plastic. You fished trash out of a bin and think it proves something?" "It was broken," Madeline corrected, her voice gaining strength, filling the room. "But the encryption chip was intact. And do you know the funny thing about high-level Russian encryption, Philip? It relies on a linguistic key, a voice-activated password phrase to access the ledger." Philip's hands curled into fists on the table. "You're bluffing. You can't prove anything about that chip." "I don't need to prove the chip," Madeline said, a cold smile touching her lips. "I just need to translate the mistake you made." She opened her folder and pulled out a spectral frequency analysis, a visual representation of a voice recording. "I listened to the audio logs embedded on the chip," she said, holding the paper up for the room to see. "You recorded your meetings with Dmitry Volkov. You kept them as insurance, didn't you? In case the Bratva turned on you. You thought you were smart." "You can't prove whose voice that is," Philip yelled, standing up. His chair scraped violently against the floor. "It could be anyone. It's a deep fake." "Oh, I don't need a voice match," Madeline said, her eyes locking onto his. "I have something better. I have a linguistic fingerprint." She tapped the paper. "On the recording, dated November 14th, you confirm the wire transfer of $300 million to the Blue Horizon account. You spoke in German to show off to Volkov's associates. You said, 'Das Geld ist auf der 300 Konten.'" The room was deathly quiet. Even the FBI agents were watching her. "You used the feminine article, der, for a dative plural noun," Madeline explained, slipping effortlessly into the cadence of a professor. "A native German speaker would never make that mistake. A Swiss banker would never make that mistake. But an arrogant American who took high school German and refuses to learn proper grammar? He would." Philip looked around the room, wild-eyed. He looked at the ADA, who was slowly backing away from the table, distancing himself from the radioactive fallout. The FBI voice analysis confirmed the error pattern matches your public speeches, Madeline said, delivering the final blow. "You laundered money for the Russian mob. You defrauded American investors. And you used my tray to serve the drinks while you did it." Philip slammed his hand on the table. "This is a setup. She's a waitress. She's a nobody. She speaks gutter dialects and wipes tables." "I speak 5 languages," Madeline said, her voice ringing with a finality that shattered his defense. "And guilty sounds the same in all of them." One of the FBI agents stepped forward, his hand resting on his holster. "Philip Waldorf, you are under arrest for racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit fraud." Philip froze. For a second, he looked like he might run. He looked at the window, then at the door blocked by the agents. The reality of it crashed down on him. The money, the influence, the fear he inspired. It was all smoke, and Madeline had just opened a window. "Turn around, sir," the agent commanded. As the handcuffs clicked around Philip's wrists, heavy, steel, real handcuffs, not the polite kind used for white-collar surrenders, he looked at Madeline one last time. His face was a mask of shock. He couldn't process it. He had been destroyed not by a rival corporation, but by the woman he had dismissed as background noise. Madeline leaned in close, so only he could hear. "Giles was right," she whispered, her voice like ice. "You really should have been more careful about who you let listen." Philip was hauled toward the door, his lawyers scrambling after him, shouting into their phones. The room emptied of noise, leaving only the heavy silence of the aftermath. Lucas stood up and placed a hand on Madeline's shoulder. She let out a breath she felt like she had been holding for 3 days. "You did it," Lucas said softly. "We did it," Madeline corrected, looking at the empty chair where Philip had sat. "Is Katya safe?" "She is on a private jet to Zurich as we speak," Lucas assured her. "She will be the head housekeeper at my estate. No extradition, no Volkov. She is safe." Madeline nodded, feeling the adrenaline finally crash into exhaustion. Her legs felt weak. She sat back down, staring at the plastic bag with the broken red keycard. It was over. "So, what now?" she asked, rubbing her temples. "I suppose my consulting contract is over. The job is done." Lucas walked around the table and sat in Philip's empty chair. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick, bound document. "Waldorf Dynamics is going into receivership," Lucas said, his tone shifting back to business. The government will seize the assets, but the operational arm, the legitimate part, needs new leadership to restructure. Thousands of innocent employees will lose their jobs if the company dissolves. He slid the document across the table to her. I bought the controlling stake in the distressed asset sale this morning, Lucas said. I need a CEO for the new American division. Someone who understands the company's lies, but also its potential. Someone who can speak to the European board, the American workers, and the international press. Madeline looked at the cover of the contract. The letters were embossed in gold. Chief Executive Officer, Weber Waldorf Global. She looked up at him, stunned. You want me to run his company? I don't want you to run it. Lucas smiled, a genuine, warm expression. I want you to own it. The waitress uniform is retired, Madeline. It's time to order from the menu. Madeline looked out the window. The sun was setting over the Manhattan skyline. Somewhere out there, the Onyx Room was preparing for the dinner rush. Servers were smoothing tablecloths, terrified of making a mistake, invisible to the people they served. She picked up the pen. It felt heavy, substantial. I have a few changes to make to the dress code, she said, and then she signed her name. The fall of Philip Waldorf became the financial scandal of the decade, but for Madeline, it was just the beginning. She didn't just rebuild the company, she revolutionized it. And every time she dined at the Onyx Room, which she now owned, she made sure to look the servers in the eye, learn their names, and tip them effectively, because she knew that the person pouring the water might just be the smartest person in the room. Philip Waldorf is currently serving a 25-year sentence in a federal facility, where, ironically, he has been assigned to the kitchen duty. Rumor has it, he's struggling to learn Spanish to communicate with his cellmate. Did this story of revenge and justice satisfy you? If you enjoyed seeing the underdog win, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to share this video with a friend who needs some inspiration, and subscribe for more stories of twisted karma and dramatic retribution.